That silence has a meaning, and some part of you has known it since the first hour. Stop pretending otherwise. They left you on red on purpose, and somewhere in you, an apology is already forming for something you never even did. They thought they could test your calm and walk away without paying for it. Delay every reply a little longer than it needed to be. Let one of your messages hang in the air. Cool their tone by half a degree, just enough to make you doubt yourself, just enough to make you ask what you did wrong this time. And for a while, that bet paid off. You chased, you explained, you justified yourself. You filled every gap with words nobody asked you for. But there is one thing they never factored in. Calm that holds its ground does not destroy the person who stays quiet. It pulls the ground out from under the person who was counting on your reaction to stay ahead. What you are about to hear is not an elegant theory about patience. It is a map. The map of a quiet war almost nobody dares to name, where the weapon is not a scream or a scene, but a reply that never comes, aimed with surgical precision. And once you understand how it works from the inside, something shifts. You stop being the current someone else redirects at will, and you become the shoreline that decides what gets in. This is not about punishing anyone. It is not about hitting back. It is about taking back something you gave away without noticing you were giving it away. The right to not answer every single time someone decides to pull the string. Staying quiet on purpose is not hiding. It is sharpening your aim. It means knowing you do not owe a response to every provocation, that chasing clarity gets you nowhere. Real control looks like a door closed gently, not slammed shut. And the more you practice it, the clearer something becomes that you could not see before. The scale starts tipping the other way. And this is not some quick trick. It is a process in stages. At first they think they have everything under control, then something stops adding up. Later, that discomfort turns into irritation, and eventually comes the moment they realize, even without saying it out loud, that they never actually had the upper hand they thought they had. This path is not comfortable. The urge to explain yourself, to ask questions, to clear the air is always there, waiting. But anyone who really understands Stoic logic knows the real test is not outside you. It is inside you. Resisting the urge to fill that gap is the whole challenge. And once you get past it, it changes everything about how you show up for everything else. Nobody warns you when it starts. There is no explosion, no door slammed, no signal you can point to later. It moves in like a shadow, quiet, without making a sound. It starts with tiny details, a reply that takes longer than usual, a tone that cools half a degree, a message left on read with nothing after it, things that look random. But behind that apparent randomness, a test is already running. That is how most of these dynamics begin, without any noise at all. Day after day, the same small gestures repeat, and without realizing it, you are already inside the game. The other person decides when everything happens, and you fall in line without thinking about it, like someone following a rhythm they never chose. This is not an open argument. It is a silent tug-of-war where the absence of a reply weighs more than any word could. If this pattern sounds familiar, if you already know that itch to fill the silence before it turns unbearable, here is something worth saying plainly. Recognizing this is not a flaw in you. It usually just means somebody found the exact place where you still flinch. That gap between seeing the pattern and actually holding your ground under it is the entire subject of The Power of Not Reacting, my ebook. Not theory, just what actually happens the night your hand reaches for the screen on its own. It is pinned to the top of the comments if you want to go find it. Here is something worth sitting with. Most people read this phase as abandonment, as if the other person simply stopped caring. But it is often not abandonment at all. It is precision. It is a maneuver dressed up as calm. And this is exactly where power dynamics become invisible to anyone who does not know where to look. That silence is not empty. Whatever is late on purpose, whatever disappears with intention, all of it works like a test. They are measuring how predictable you are. They are measuring how fast you lose your footing the moment uncertainty shows up. It is a surface reflecting straight back with no filter, whatever the other person is projecting onto you. Think about how a structure gets stress tested before anyone calls it safe. They load it deliberately, just to see where it gives. Something similar happens here. They build controlled tension with distance, with pauses, with a closure that never quite arrives on purpose. If you crack fast, They have already found the weak point, and from there they know exactly where to press next time. They are not trying to ignore you forever. They are trying to see if you chase the silence. They pull back to watch how you react, whether you can sit with the gap or whether you rush to cover it. Every long pause is a hidden question about how much you can hold without knowing the answer. And because it is a silent tactic, almost nobody catches it in time. People mistake their own storm for the other person's disinterest, but it is not always indifference. Sometimes it is a tug of war, and you are dancing to a beat they set long before you suspected there was any music playing at all. There is a scene that repeats in 1,000 different versions. You are mid-sentence in a conversation with someone else entirely, and you catch yourself answering a question that was never asked because half your attention had drifted 3 days back to something they never said. That is the whole point. They did not have to do a single thing. Their silence made you talk for both of you, even when nobody was there to hear it. And there is something even more subtle going on. The constant coldness is not what hooks the deepest. The mixing is. One day they answer fast, warm, like nothing ever happened. The next day they vanish without warning. That back and forth between closeness and distance is what pulls hardest, because your mind starts chasing the good moment and repeating whatever you did the last time they finally wrote back. Without noticing, you train yourself to please. Every warm return reinforces the idea that if you behave well, if you say the right thing, the distance will end. And that makes you far easier to manage than any direct complaint ever could. Look at what happens to your time. You used to have a life with its own rhythm. Now part of you is stuck on pause, waiting. You clean out a drawer you have not touched in months, and halfway through, you notice you only did it to keep your hands busy. The other person's absence takes up no physical space at all, and yet it settles right in the center of your attention and runs your entire day from there. That is the real cost, and it almost never gets named. The time you spend without a reply is not what costs you. The time you spend thinking about it is, and when you finally give in and write too much, something happens that you do not see in the moment. You are not just handing over information, you are shifting position. You go from being someone with their own center to being someone who is asking, and whoever is asking, in any power dynamic, ends up a step lower. Not because they are worth less, but because they just showed they need something the other person can give or withhold whenever they feel like it. Once that position is out in the open, it is expensive to win back. This is why holding the line early matters so much. And this has nothing to do with pride. It has to do with deciding not to hand over control before the game has even started. None of this means the other person is some calculating monster, keeping score of every move. Sometimes there are old wounds, fears, things they learned a long time ago. But understanding the mechanism does not depend on guessing their intentions. It depends on recognizing the effect it has on you. You can hold all the compassion in the world for whatever the other person is carrying and still refuse to build your life around their absence. Understanding is not the same as giving in. You can understand why someone acts a certain way and in the same breath decide you will not put your peace in their hands anymore. There is a question worth asking yourself quietly, without any drama. If this person never wrote to you again, what would you do with the next few hours? Most people asking themselves that discover they have an entire life waiting to be picked back up. Work, people, unfinished things, good silences. The problem was never a lack of options. It was that all your energy was pointed at a single screen. Give that energy back to your own life, and the other person's absence stops carrying the same weight, not because you stop feeling it, but because you stop orbiting a single point. The regret hits fast. The other person disappears and you replay every word you said. You analyze gestures, tones, timing. The quiet after a break hits especially hard because you are chasing a closure that never comes. And while you burn through energy chasing that last sentence, the certainty you used to have about yourself slowly comes apart. It works like those interrogations where the questioner says nothing at all. Sometimes the absence of words presses harder than any threat could. The other person, uncomfortable with the gap, fills it by confessing everything. The same thing happens in an unequal bond. The void pushes you to lay yourself bare. Here is a distinction worth keeping close. Someone with real self-control stays quiet to hold their own balance. Someone who manipulates stays quiet to manufacture leverage. The difference is in the intention. One comes from discipline, the other comes from calculation. And noticing that difference changes everything, because once you understand where their silence actually comes from, you stop carrying it as a personal wound. Watch the pattern closely. First they cut back contact, then they stretch the time between each exchange. Later they disappear almost entirely. And by the time you spot the maneuver, it has already been running for a while. It works under the radar. You rationalize, you look for logical explanations, while your body has already gone on alert. The mind hates stories without an ending, and anyone who understands that mechanism knows exactly how to use it. They come across as calm, at peace, almost wise, but it is often not peace at all, it is calculation. They understand that a well-placed silence shifts a dynamic faster than any argument ever could. In these cases, control is not lost through shouting. It is lost in the questions that never get answered. Picture two people dancing. One leads with steady steps. The other keeps guessing the next move and always lands half a beat late. If you cannot tell who is setting the tempo, you will always be reacting a step behind. For anyone who does not recognize these maneuvers, the moment is pure disorientation. You do not know whether to wait, chase, or let go. And the other person thrives exactly inside that indecision. Cutting contact will not protect you if there is no real steadiness underneath it. Without that, it just becomes a stage where the other person watches you fall apart. This is where it turns. Understanding that the silence is not neutral changes the entire game. The moment you recognize the absence is deliberate, the spell starts to break. Real distance is not born from reacting, it is born from perceiving. You stop feeding the mystery and start seeing the structure hiding underneath it. The danger is reading the other person's calm as a lack of interest. What looks like coldness is often a way of tightening the bond between you. That is how the quiet shift in power happens. One person talks less, the other talks more and gives everything away. Faced with the gap, your mind rushes to build a story. And whoever controls that story controls the dynamic. This is the real battlefield, and words never draw its lines. What someone stops saying does. If you do not see it in time, you end up dancing to a rhythm the other person set, long before you ever suspected there was music playing underneath it all. And here comes the most uncomfortable truth of this entire stage. Breaking rank at this point means jumping on impulse the moment the silence shows up. The other person does not even need to push. All they have to do is wait. Your own impatience does the job for them. If you have ever typed something like, "I do not understand why you are not answering me," you have already lived this from the inside. That message reveals fear, reveals dependence, reveals that you had not actually let go yet, and it shows the other person exactly where to press next time. This weapon feeds on the gap between your urgency and your lack of a plan. Once you react, there is no walking it back. They have already seen what was behind your composure. They already know how to keep you spinning in a loop of analyzing and chasing. And the hardest truth is this: it is not the other person's absence that betrays you. It is your response. If you cannot master this stage, whatever you try next collapses before it even starts. This is worth stopping on, because it is exactly where almost everyone trips. Your head knows you should not text, and your fingers move anyway. That is not a lack of intelligence, that is a body asking for relief and asking for it right now. Uncertainty creates real physical tension, a knot you want to untie as fast as possible. And the fastest way out looks like sending that message, making that call, pulling any reaction out of the other person at all. Even an argument feels better than silence, because at least it confirms the other person is still there. That is the dirtiest trick in this entire dynamic. It pushes you to prefer conflict over absence. And the moment you accept any scrap just to break the tension, you teach the other person they can give you the bare minimum and still keep you close. Learning to sit with that discomfort without rushing to shut it down is the skill that changes everything. Not because you go numb, but because you stop trading your peace for scraps. Every standoff like this hits a breaking point eventually, and that point does not announce itself loudly. It announces itself as a quiet decision. Stop reacting. No speech is required, just clarity. You understand that chasing, explaining, and filling every gap only deepens the imbalance. You realize command here is not about winning arguments, it is about managing the rhythm. Whoever is manipulating depends on you being predictable. When you choose stillness over reflex, you break the cycle. You stop moving on their command and start owning the clock. Picture an army that suddenly stops advancing. The other side, used to your every move, is thrown off. They had built their plan around your impulses, not your calm. That is where your underlying steadiness becomes decisive. More than coldness, it is a calculated retreat, the kind you take with a clear head, not a bruised ego. Cutting contact without real discipline underneath is fragile. With calm that genuinely comes from within, it becomes a tremor that shakes the other person's whole structure. Before, a flat okay would send you scrambling to reply instantly, hunting for whatever was hiding behind those two letters. Now you let it float in the air. Your silence is no longer weakness, it is a way of being present without moving a muscle, and the mystery flips. Before, you were the one doubting, now the other person cannot read you anymore. Their tactics lose their grip because they cannot find your map. This is where the ego of whoever held the advantage starts to crack. Whoever holds the advantage depends on patterns they can predict. When those patterns break, they lose control. They press the usual buttons and nothing happens. That silence is their weak point. It reveals their strength depended entirely on your cooperation. Staying quiet with strategy at this stage is not disappearing. It is getting your balance back. You stop playing their rhythm and start building your own. Think about something simple. Someone used to instant replies sends a message. Hours pass. Then a full day. And there is no chasing, no justifying, no explaining on your part. You have simply stopped playing a part they never asked you if you wanted. The shift in power is quiet but obvious. First they feel annoyed, then confused, eventually uneasy. This is the moment that separates the people who repeat the same cycles from the people who master them. Composure shows in your aim, not in your coldness. You decide when to answer, if you answer at all. You set the tempo. And in any power dynamic, tempo is nearly everything. They expect urgency and get stability instead. They expect a reaction and find calm. Their plan starts falling apart. You do not need to announce this shift. You do not need to say, I am not playing this game anymore. Words would only weaken the effect. The stillness is the message. Most people fumble right here, trying to explain their own distance and end up handing back control without even noticing. When you take on this posture, something settles inside you. The anxious energy dissolves, your head clears. You stop obsessing over what the other person's absence means and start noticing what your own silence produces. Their reactions change. Whatever they used to dominate you with now bounces back toward them like an echo. The weapon has changed hands. They start asking themselves what happened, why you stopped following their lead, at what exact point they lost the thread. And that is precisely where the pressure starts reversing. It no longer lands on you, it lands on them. Before we go further, let me be straight with you about something. All of this sounds good while you are listening to it, but holding on to it when the urgency hits is an entirely different story. This is not about turning cold or pretending nothing touches you. It is about no longer handing your calm away so easily. About learning not to give up control the second something feels uncomfortable. If this idea of taking back your rhythm through calm, not through chasing or explaining, is exactly what you have been trying to figure out, that is the entire foundation of the power of not reacting. It walks through how to hold this posture on the nights it feels impossible, not with slogans, but with something you can actually use. Link is in the pinned comment below, along with a discount for anyone already subscribed to the channel. 37% off, no countdown clock attached to it. It is simply there for you. Now let us look at how this stops being a single moment of strength and becomes a system. Once the decision is made, stillness stops being an absence and becomes a structure. There are no more impulsive replies, no more emotional escapes. Every move, even the move of not moving, has a reason behind it. These dynamics do not change through talking, they change through discipline. And that discipline rests on 5 clear pillars. Start with time. It is the most underrated resource in any standoff like this. You stop answering on their rhythm and start setting your own. Minutes turn into hours, hours turn into days. Sometimes you do not answer at all. Whatever used to be automatic now passes through an actual decision of yours. Control gets forged in those pauses. Every delay communicates without a single word and dismantles the predictability they were counting on. Where they used to read your speed as an easy signal, now they face a blank screen that tells them nothing. Then there is measured speech. When talking is necessary, every sentence is stripped down. Fine. Understood. Thanks. Short answers. No weight attached. That hand over nothing. Far from passive, they work like small shields. The other person can no longer read your inner state. They used to draw power from your long messages, full of nuance and justifications they could turn against you. Now they hit a smooth wall with nothing to grab onto, and that lack of a handhold throws them off more than any reprimand ever could. Third, inner distance. This is not about pretending you do not care. It is about actually retreating toward your own center. Composure here is not apathy, it is clarity. You observe instead of jumping. If they send an ambiguous message, you do not rush to fill in the blanks with your own anxiety. If they vanish, you do not spiral. Stillness stops being a pause between two emotions and becomes a stable place you watch everything from with sharper eyes. It is the difference between waiting in tension for the other person to fold and simply standing on your own ground, busy living your own life. And then there is self-mastery, maybe the hardest one to hold on to. The urge to explain yourself, to break the calm, is real, and it keeps coming back, especially when the gap stretches out longer. Every time you resist it, you strengthen your position. This is where composure stops being an idea and becomes something concrete, something you can actually touch. Composure does not prove itself when everything is clear. It proves itself at 2 in the morning, when your head starts inventing disasters and your hand instinctively reaches for something to hold on to. Winning right there, in that small moment nobody sees, matters more than any speech ever could. These small acts of discipline build a new structure inside you. You stop measuring your day by their movements and start measuring it by your own. You stop running off their signals. You run on your own time. This method does not lean on hope. It leans on structure. You are not waiting for the other person to come back. You are rewriting the rules, and that deeply destabilizes anyone who depended on control. All at once, whoever used to call every shot discovers the old wiring does not respond the same way anymore. They press the old buttons, and nothing happens. They send a lukewarm message and get 3 words back hours later. They delay contact, and you stay just as steady. The script has broken. Your calm is no longer emptiness, it is calculation. It reflects stability, not escape. It marks real distance, not a tantrum in disguise, and that difference is enormous. Someone who doesn't understand it uses stillness as an outlet. Someone who masters it uses it like a scalpel. Their tactics depended on your cycles. Without those cycles, doubt creeps in. The mystery gets under their skin. Now they are the ones studying your pauses, looking for a meaning they will not find. The tension builds up on their side. At first they barely notice, but it works slowly, like water on stone. Their first reaction is confusion, then irritation, because they hate losing control of the tempo. They try provocations. They resurface out of nowhere with a message loaded with old memories. They react to an old photo just to see if you respond. They post something at midnight, hoping you will see it. They drop lines dripping with calculated nostalgia, hoping you take the bait. But your position does not move, and that unsettles them more than any argument could. The reversal is complete. Before, you were the one analyzing every delay. Now they cannot make sense of the shift. Their ego starts to crack. Their plan depended on you being predictable, and you broke that. Their messages turn inconsistent, sometimes cold, sometimes soaked in nostalgia. At that point, it has stopped being tactics and become pure disorientation. When your calm holds steady, their position wavers. They start asking themselves the same questions that used to make you doubt yourself, whether they lost control, whether they still matter to you. At what exact moment, everything changed. This is where the crack forms, and the interesting part is you do not have to attack anyone for it to show. All it takes is not moving, and their dependence stays right there, with nobody left to catch it. This is the point where the pressure stops crushing you and starts squeezing them instead. From here on, Stillness stops being a reaction and becomes identity. Holding a response, weighing your words, letting the moment pass without filling the gap, all of it starts carrying an authority you did not have before. Their moves used to depend on you being emotionally available. Once that supply dries up, their script falls apart, and now your time is the one calling the shots. But control without consistency collapses. That is why this stage demands steadiness with no cracks in it. Your calm stops being a tactic you pull out sometimes and becomes a habit. Measured words, self-mastery, a clear frame, and command of your own time stop costing you effort. They become part of how you simply work. Their games stop landing. They grasp at threads that keep slipping through their fingers. Your distance after a breakdown is no longer defense, it is presence. Sustained absence becomes its own gravity. They orbit your stillness, reacting to something they can no longer manage. This does not end in an explosion. It ends in an inevitable calm that surrounds them from every side. By now you see every attempt coming with total clarity. Control is not about holding out once. It is about holding the line every time. One impulsive reaction can reopen the old dynamic. Discipline is what separates a good moment from an actual transformation. At this point, your strategy is no longer emotional. It is structural. Stillness has become the filter every interaction passes through before you decide what to do with it. Your cold replies, or even your total silence, are not acts of cruelty. They are a way of saying you no longer depend on them. Where they used to predict you, now they face a blank page. And that emptiness, looked at closely, has the texture of real composure. Self-control shows up precisely in the absence of unnecessary movement. This is where the other person's ego truly starts to crumble. It is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is long pauses between messages, other times shifts in tone, warmth mixed with frustration. Sometimes they simply vanish, not as a maneuver, but because they lost control and do not know what to do without it. The weapon has changed hands. And one important thing, your role here is not revenge, and it is not about savoring their discomfort either. This was never about hurting anyone. You just let reality do its work. Their regret grows on its own, without you pushing it. They replay old scenes and recognize, even just to themselves, that their strength depended on you being predictable. Their absence only carried weight because you gave it that weight. Now it is just an echo bouncing off an empty wall. The only real risk left at this point is your own inconsistency. One impulsive move hands them back ground. They would read it as a sign the old pattern is still breathing. That is why the steadiness has to hold. Stillness is no longer a temporary wall. It is a new inner architecture that does not fall apart over one bad night. Watch how the other person's behavior starts mirroring your old patterns. They show up somewhere they know you might be, with an excuse that does not hold up under a second look. They try to read meaning into throwaway sentences. What used to occupy your head now occupies theirs. This is the final flip of the dynamic. Cutting contact stops being a rule you follow with effort and becomes a natural state. It does not come from resentment, but from a clarity that has settled in for good. You no longer feel the need to justify yourself. The stillness has become instinct, and in that state their tactics have nothing left to hold on to. This sustained distance does not just level the field, it tilts it in your favor. The distance you built is not passive, it is magnetic. It forces the other person to sit alone with exactly what they always avoided looking at, their own anxiety and their own dependence. It is ground they cannot control no matter how hard they try. You have become the point their uncertainty orbits around. No aggression, no noise, held up by nothing but the simple fact that you no longer move. The shift in power is complete. Because in the end, not answering says more than any speech ever could. It does not need to raise its voice. It does not need to justify itself. It simply holds. And in that holding, it reveals everything. Whoever once believed they ran the story with their own coldness now faces a reflection they cannot switch off: your absence. What started as a game, someone else was steering ends as a structure collapsing from the inside. At this stage, you no longer chase explanations or look for closure in conversations that only ever fed the other person's advantage. You understood that real control is not about winning the argument, it is about governing your own impulses. You answer when you have something to say, not when something stings. You let the rest go. While the other person studies your pauses, reads between the lines, and tries to win back ground, you watch, calm. Staying quiet on purpose is not looking for revenge. It does not aim to destroy anyone. Its strength lies in exposing, without a single word, the difference between depending on someone and standing on your own. This is where Stoicism stops being an abstract idea and becomes something you can actually touch. Absence stops being a hiding place and becomes an anchor. And once that shift settles in, something interesting happens. You no longer need to use stillness as a tactic. It becomes simply how you are. Not to manipulate anyone, but to protect who you are. What used to cost you enormous effort is now just who you are, and from there, nothing coming from outside has that same power over you anymore. The other person, meanwhile, faces their own maze. Whatever does not reply, whatever takes too long, whatever comes back cold instead of warm, all of it forces them to look inward. What they once used as a weapon is now a reflex they cannot control. It is the direct result of underestimating the strength you had been holding on to the whole time. This is the closing of a story that never needed a final speech. There is no epic confrontation. There is no last word. There is only a reality that asserts itself on its own. The power has changed hands. If any of this has actually landed for you, if you have felt in your own nights the weight of that urgency and the relief that comes with choosing not to jump, do not let it stay stuck in a video you watched once. Keep the power of not reacting close by, the guide built for exactly the nights when theory alone is not enough. It is sitting at the top of the comments, waiting whenever you need it. Using it is not a favor to me. It is a tool for the nights your hand drifts toward the screen on its own, something solid to hold on to. And if this way of seeing things is useful to you, if it is the kind of clarity you want to keep coming back to, stay on the channel. Not to fill your day with more noise, but to have one quiet place to sort your head out whenever things get tangled. Maybe the hardest part of all this is not holding the stillness, but accepting what it shows you. Because once you stop filling every gap, you also stop distracting yourself. And in that calm, questions show up that you used to bury under activity. Why staying still cost you so much? Why one person's approval outweighed your own? What you were really chasing every time you rushed to explain yourself. You do not have to answer all of it at once, but the simple fact that these questions surface already tells you something has shifted. You stopped looking outward, waiting for a sign, and started looking inward, which is where control was always sitting. Over time, you notice this way of being stretches beyond one single person. You start responding differently at work, with family, with people who used to knock you off balance with a single comment. Not because you turned hard, but because you learned to let 1 second pass before reacting. That 1 second, so small it is almost invisible, is where your freedom actually lives. It is the space between what someone makes you feel and what you choose to do with it. At first you have to search for it on purpose, then it just shows up on its own, and one day you realize the impulses that used to run your days do not drag you around anymore. Do not expect the change to arrive with fireworks. It almost never does. It is more likely an ordinary afternoon when a notification goes off and for the first time you feel no urge to look. You see it, you keep doing what you were doing, and you answer when you feel like it, if you answer at all. Right there in that small unwitnessed gesture is the proof that you no longer run on anyone else's clock. You did not announce it, you did not celebrate it. It simply happened because you built something solid inside while the noise outside kept trying to get in. And the quietest part of this whole shift is that nobody has to know. You do not have to tell anyone, post about it, or prove to anyone that you changed. People will notice it in the details, in the fact that you no longer jump, that your time stopped being available to whoever demanded it. But that is a side effect, not the goal. The goal is you back at your own center, meeting life from steadier ground. Everything else, including whatever happens to the other person, is just the reflection of a change that happened inside first. Because this path is not for everyone. It is for whoever decides to take back the pen on their own story, whoever stops reacting and starts building from calm instead. Your phone buzzes on some ordinary Tuesday. You catch it out of the corner of your eye, finish tying your shoes, and head out for your run anyway. You will answer later, or maybe not.